Good morning, children. Yesterday we had covered a bit of Attila the Hun, and I had explained it why Attila happens to be such an important figure in the history of the world, and especially when it comes to the Roman civilization. And I told you why was he considered to be such a glorious military general. Now, why his name came up was that because we are studying the chapter on nomadic civilizations and empires, so you have to understand, we were trying to work it out as to how those empires are different to the sedentary or the stationary empires that we normally know of, right? Because these nomadic tribes and these nomadic empires, basically they are always on move. 80% of them are always and continuously in movement, unlike our system, that is whereby we live in homes, we live in permanent homes, we might be living in a particular house for 20 years, 25 years, or things like that. We normally do not move around just looking at the world around us. So today, unlike starting this the paragraph that is in the end, unlike Attila, however, Genghis Khan's political system was far more durable and survived its founder. We had also seen yesterday that. Though Attila was a great general, but we had also seen the flaw which was there in his system, whereby he was not an empire builder. So, as soon as Attila was gone, his sons were not as great as their illustrious father, and his three sons, spent it up most of the time fighting with each other to actually have that throne, and they ultimately the empire couldn't stand there. Everything disintegrated. No one got anything. So what we are trying to say here is Genghis Khan was different in that he had he had learnt from the faults which had if I don't know if he learnt it from the problem of Attila, but I'm sure he would have understood the problem with the nomadic tribes, which is once the pivot, who happens to be a great general or someone with extremely resourceful tact, and who is extremely resourceful and tactful and a great military general. Now he's able to cobble everything together, but the moment he's gone, everything disintegrates. So Genghis Khan undertook a lot of measures which we would further see in this chapter. So coming here, Genghis Khan's political system was far more durable and survived its founder. It was stable enough to counter large armies with superior equipment in China, Iran, and Eastern Europe. As and as they established control over these regions, the Mongols administered complex agrarian economies and urban settlements, sedentary societies that were quite distant from their own social experience and habitat. So, students, it was a great quality of the Mongols, unlike the Huns, who, when they were expanding rapidly and they were encountering different people from different cultures, some of them nomadic, some of them sedentary, but they had that talent, they had that skill to bring everyone together and ensure a solid administrative system whereby all of them could be brought under one administrative system, one umbrella of governance, something which Attila was never able to do because he was not an empire builder. But Genghis Khan was different. He understood that if through his brutal means and through his sheer determination and dominance, if he tries to bulldoze his opinion and ensure that every land that he conquers starts behaving like a Mongol, starts believing like a Mongol, then that system would not work. So he allowed them their autonomy, you know that yes, they could wish and they could follow their own practices, they could follow their own system, they could follow their gods, their belief systems, and he was okay with that. Okay, and in fact, the scant resources of the steppe lands drove Mongols and other central nomads into trade and barter with their sedentary neighbors in China. As you have to understand that the Mongols were tribes, so always on move. So naturally, for their most of their food grains and a lot of other requirements, they have to depend on the sedentary societies who are indulging in agriculture, societies who are into farming, societies who are into producing different vegetables and things like that. Okay, societies who would be into all those kind of activities, making cloth and everything like that. For example, they needed those, and that's the reason why Mongols needed the Chinese, who were a very, very urban and a sedentary society. But we would also see that the Chinese also needed Mongols, and this was mutually beneficial to both parties. Agriculture produce and iron utensils from China were exchanged for horses, furs, and game trapped in the steppe. Commerce was not without its tensions, especially as two groups unhesitatingly applied military pressure to enhance profit. When the Mongol lineages allied, they could force their Chinese neighbors to offer better terms, and trade ties were sometimes discarded in favor of outright plunder. So, guys, we see that yes, the Mongols and the Chinese had been interacting with each other for generations. But then it was not just a trade kind of a thing that they used to exchange commodities, whether through barter or through payment. No, because Mongols would like to have they would disagree with a lot of things with the Chinese, and the Chinese used to disagree with Mongols on a lot of things, and naturally, most of the times they ended up fighting amongst each other, and that is what we see here. The Chinese would then confidently assert their influence in the steppe. Basically, it meant when Chinese felt that the Mongols were not properly united, Chinese would enter into the Mongol areas and loot and plunder and get the best deal for themselves. And when the Mongols felt that the Chinese frontiers were not well guarded, and they felt that yes, now they have a weak governor or something, or the weak ruler in Beijing, they would actually enter the Chinese territories and then loot and plunder. So it was basically no one would learn. So yeah, that was their favorite part-time activity. So these frontier wars were more debilitating to settled societies. But you have to understand one very important thing, that it was the Chinese who lost more from these military adventures or misadventures, because the Chinese were a sedentary or a stationary society, unlike the Mongols. When the Chinese used to when the Mongols or the Chinese used to fight each other, the when the Chinese had to win, otherwise the Mongols would enter all those towns and villages and plunder and destroy everything and leave everything to ruins. But the Mongols had an advantage because they did not have a sedentary life. They did not have towns. They did not have villages. So even if the Chinese were winning and the Mongols were losing, they would just flee the fields. The Mongols, yeah. If they would see that yes, they are not, the day is not theirs, and they would just flee. So they are not losing anything. The Chinese would just chase them, and then ultimately these guys would just go into the and disappear into the steppes. Unlike the Chinese situation, where they have towns and villages and people living there and working there in the paddy fields, and naturally when the Mongols there, and if at all the Chinese army has not been successful in stopping that onslaught, then definitely Chinese would be losing far more bitterly. So that's what they are talking about. And students, you have to understand that it is not just that this started happening when Genghis Khan became the ruler, and he started a new practice of plundering the Chinese territories. No, uh, you'd be surprised to know that the Mongols and Chinese, they've had this very disquieting relationship for centuries before, even before Genghis Khan, because the Chinese had been building their walls against these Mongol onslaughts for even 600 years before Christ was born, right? Now, Genghis Khan is what, 13th century, right? AD. That is, so now we are talking about 1500 years before Genghis Khan, 1600 years before Genghis Khan. Even then, they were always fighting amongst each other. The Mongols with their own typical way of living, Chinese with their own typical way of living. So that precisely is the reason why you have to understand that when we talk about the Great Wall of China, it is not a wall which the Ming dynasty, they just built it over a period of 100 or 150 years. The wall has been under construction, and and the Chinese have been erecting walls even 600 before years before the birth of Christ. And of course those walls do not, now you only find their ruins. But then yes, so that clearly is an indication that yes, they never had a cordial relationship. The career of Genghis Khan. Like, Genghis Khan was born sometime around 1162 near Onon River in the northwest, in the north of present-day Mongolia. Named Temujin, he was the son of Yesgei, the chieftain of the Kiyat, a group of family related to Borigid clan. His father was murdered at an early age, and his mother, Olunkek, raised Temujin, his brothers and stepbrothers in great hardship. The following decade was full of reversals. Temujin was captured and enslaved, and soon after his marriage, his wife Borte was kidnapped and he had to fight to recover her. During these years of hardship, he also managed to make important friends. The young Bogoshu was brother and was another. Temujin also restored old alliances with the ruler of the Karagets, Tugril Onkan, his father's old blood brother. Students, you have to understand, we've always known, and I'm sure as a student of history, you are also aware that Genghis Khan he did not inherit that greatness or the Mongol Empire from his father or his uncles or anyone for that matter. He did not get anything on the plate. He had to fight for it. He had a very strong and desire to succeed, of course, but his childhood was spent in enormous hardship. And as we just read, his father was murdered when he was very young, and it was his mother who brought him and his cousin brothers and sisters with great hardship. And so we shall continue here. uh, Thank you.